Hi everybody, I'm Ryan, and today we're going to talk about Domain in Standard. We're going to talk about card selection in the deck, the overall strategy of the deck, how you play the deck, and yeah, I would also like to put a little bit of disclaimer on this. There isn't a stock list yet. This is the list that I have been playing with, so let's jump into it. So this is the standard Domain deck. Effectively, what this deck is attempting to do is just play very powerful, sometimes undercosted cards in order to draw a ton of cards off of Up the Beanstalk. And the way we do that is by casting Overlord of the Hauntwoods, Overlord of the Flood Pit, and Overlord of the Mistmoors, because even if we pay the impending cost, it's still considered to be a card that costs 5 or more, because Up the Beanstalk says when it enters and when you cast a spell mana value 5 or greater, draw a card. So even if I'm paying 3 mana for Overlord of the Hauntwoods, it is still a 5 mana card, so I still draw a card off of Up the Beanstalk. So Overlord of the Hauntwoods is a 5 mana 6/5 with impending 4, meaning that it enters as an enchantment with 4 impending counters on it. You take impending counters off of it at the beginning of each end step. Or actually, I guess they're called time counters, but whatever. And when the last one is removed, it becomes a creature. And whenever it enters or attacks, create a tapped colorless land token named Everywhere that is every basic land type, which also helps with our domain and fixes our colors, all of that stuff. Overlord of the Flood Pits is a 5 mana 5/3 with impending 4 with flying, and when it enters or attacks, draw 2 cards and discard a card, because again, it will trigger Up the Beanstalk. And Overlord of the Mistmoors is a 7 mana 6/6 with impending 4 for 4 mana, and whenever Overlord of the Mistmoors enters or attacks, create 2/2/1 white insect creature tokens with flying. All of these things, even when cast for their cheaper costs, trigger Up the Beanstalk. So you're getting a ton of value off of playing these creatures for really cheap. They all do really relevant stuff when they enter, but also they're drawing you more cards with Up the Beanstalk. In addition, similar thing with Leyline Binding. Leyline Binding is a 6 mana card that's enchantment with flash that when it enters, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Leyline Binding leaves the battlefield. It's effectively a flash O-ring. However, the spell costs 1 less to cast for each basic land type among lands you control. And so that means if we have Overlord of the Hauntwoods, then Leyline Binding costs 1. But even if we're paying 1 mana for Leyline Binding, it still triggers Up the Beanstalk. And so we're drawing a ton of cards and getting a great amount of value off of all of these cards. In addition to that, there is an additional combo with these cards with Zur Eternal Schemer. Zur Eternal Schemer is a 3 mana 1/4 with flying. Enchantment creatures you control have Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof. Okay, that's on its surface, that sounds really good. Overlord of the Hauntwoods, Overlord of the Mistmoors, and Overlord of the Flood Pits are all enchantment creatures, so having Death Touch, Lifelink, Hexproof with Zur Eternal Schemer on the battlefield is great. However, there's an additional ability. It's for 1 white and 1 generic, target non-aura enchantment you control becomes a creature in addition to its other types and has base power and base toughness equal to its mana value. So way this works is if you impend one of these creatures, it is not a creature, it is just an enchantment. However, it can be targeted with Zur. So for example, if you have an Overlord of the Mistmoors, you pay its impending, you get those 2/2/1 insects, and then you play a Zur Eternal Schemer and target the impended Overlord of the Mistmoors, it will become a 7/7 creature that still has that text that when it enters or attacks, create 2/2/1 white insect creature tokens with flying. Also, as long as Zur is on the battlefield, creatures you control have Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof. So you'll be able to target this enchantment with Zur and attack with Overlord of the Mistmoors and trigger its attack trigger as well. That's also true with Overlord of the Hauntwoods and Overlord of the Flood Pits. And if Zur is dealt with, then these creatures remain creatures even if they still have impending counters on them. The reason I put Leyline Binding into this category as well is creating a 6/6 out of no creature is pretty good. The issue with doing it to Leyline Binding is if Leyline Binding's dealt with, then they get the thing back, so it's a little bit harder. But they effectively have to, unless they have a board wipe, I guess, they effectively have to deal with Zur first because it also gives these enchantments hexproof, which is pretty powerful. So that's the core of the deck, and the rest is to sort of support that. So we have removal in Get Lost. It's a pretty unconditional removal for planeswalkers, enchantments, and creatures. However, when it destroys those things, it creates 2 map tokens. We have a single Elspeth Smite. Some decks are playing 2 in the main deck. This is mostly for the aggressive decks. It's a 1 mana instant. Elspeth Smite deals 3 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. If that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. We're playing a single split up. Choose one, destroy all tap creatures, destroy all untapped creatures against the aggressive-ish decks that you might be playing against. This normally wipes the board for 3 mana. And then we're playing 2 Sunfall. Sunfall, 5 mana, exile all creatures, incubate X, where X is the number of creatures exiled this way. And when you incubate, you get an incubator token with X+1/+1 counters on it, and 2 mana transform it into a 0/0 Phyrexian artifact creature. So these are all of the removal. And then to support the rest of the deck and add additional power, we're playing 2 Analyze the Pollen. Analyze the Pollen is a 1 mana sorcery. As additional cost to cast a spell, you may collect Evidence 8, which is just exile cards with a total mana value of 8 or greater from your graveyard, which is pretty easy because we have a lot of cards that cost a lot. Plus, we have a ridiculous amount of Surveil lands because those are the dual lands that are domain colors. And it says, search your library for a basic land card. If evidence was collected, instead search your library for a creature or land card. Reveal that card, put it into your hand, then shuffle. So this fixes our mana, which is awesome. That's important in effectively a 4-color deck. But also, if we collect evidence, we can grab a creature. Grabbing that creature, it could be Azure, it could be one of these overlords. If you're grabbing it with Analyze, it's normally the white overlord because that's the most powerful. But also we're running a 1 of Atraxa that we can grab with Analyze the Pollen. That is a 7 mana flying vigilance, death touch, lifelink. When it enters, reveal the top 10 cards of your library. For each card type, you may put a card of that type from among the revealed cards into your hand, put the rest in the bottom of your library in a random order. So this can just kind of end the game all at once, which is so good. And we're playing a 1 of Herd Migration. Herd Migration is a 7 mana spell with Domain. Create a 3/3 green beast creature token for each basic land type among basic lands you control. And you can pay 2 mana and discard Herd Migration. Search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle, and you gain 3 life. So it's mana fixing, and it can sort of end the game in the deep late game. As far as the lands go, really we're just trying to be able to cast all of our spells. We're effectively 4 color. We can fix our mana a little bit with Cavern of Souls, and really all we need to do is cast a single Overlord of the Hauntwoods, and it fixes our color pretty good. We're effectively a green-white deck that are splashing black and blue, and then a little bit splashing red, even though we don't have red spells, red for the Leyline Binding. And in that sense, we're just making sure we have the best mana possible. As far as the sideboard goes, we have Authority of the Consuls for these aggressive decks and Convoke decks. Elsa Smite again for these aggressive decks. Rest in Peace is our Graveyard Hate. Split Up is mostly for aggressive decks, but really things that have a lot of creatures that end up tapped and they plan on attacking with. Beza's pretty solid against mid-range, but is mostly for aggro and gaining life and being a blocker. Negate for decks that have non-creature spells we care about. Tear Asunder for enchantment hate. Also like fine if we want additional hate for other permanents, because it only costs 2 more mana and this is a big mana deck anyway. We're playing Tranquil Frillback for enchantment hate. Also decent against aggro because it's a blocker and can gain life, and it's decent graveyard hate. We're playing Anissa Ascended Animus. Most of the time we're siding this in for enchantment hate, or we're siding it in just as a finisher against decks that go really, really long. And then we're playing a single Doppelgang for super, super slow decks, which frankly, if we do this for X is 2 even, it normally ends the game because you can target your opponent's stuff and your stuff. But that is Domain in Standard. I love this deck and I encourage you to try it out. If you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social medias. Links are above me and in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.